She gave a lost boy a plate of pasta, an act of kindness she almost forgot in the blur of her exhaustion. She never imagined that simple meal would one day save her dream, delivered by a family who never, ever forgets a debt. The hiss of the grill was the soundtrack to Elena's life. It was a constant, greasy whisper that followed her home from the diner, clinging to her hair, her clothes, her very soul. For 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, she moved in a fog of scorching oil and burnt coffee, her feet aching with a fire that never quite went out. The diner, with its cracked red vinyl booths and flickering fluorescent lights, was her world. It was a world of clattering plates, gruff orders, and the desperate, silent math of trying to make tips cover rent. Each night, she'd walk home to her tiny apartment, the city lights feeling less like a promise and more like a taunt. In her dreams, she didn't smell grease. She smelled simmering garlic, fresh basil, and the rich, sweet scent of her nonna's Sunday sauce. She dreamed of her own place, a little trattoria named Elena's, where the tablecloths would be checkered, the candles would be real, and every dish would be a memory. But dreams, she was learning, didn't pay the electric bill. Her reality was a stack of envelopes on a wobbly kitchen table, each one a reminder of how far she was from that dream. She was 26, but felt ancient, worn thin by a life that took more than it gave. She wasn't just tired, she was a deep, bone-weary kind of exhausted that sleep couldn't fix. The city hummed with millions of stories, and hers felt like the quietest one, a footnote in a book no one was reading. She'd look at her reflection in the dark windows of the bus on her way home, a pale face with shadows under the eyes, and wonder if this was it. Was this all her life was ever going to be? A cycle of aching feet, sticky tables, and the ghost of a dream that was fading with every passing day. Before we continue the story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. The regulars were the only thing that made the days bearable. They were islands of familiarity in a sea of anonymous faces. There was Mr. Henderson, a retired postal worker who came in every morning at 6 for black coffee and a crossword puzzle, leaving exactly a $1 tip. Never more, never less. There were the two construction workers, Sal and Bobby, who argued about baseball statistics over greasy cheeseburgers, their laughter a rare burst of light in the dim diner. They were her family, in a way. They saw her. They knew her name. They didn't know about her dreams or the threatening red letters on her bills, but they knew she made their coffee just the way they liked it. Her boss, a man named Stan, was part of the landscape too, but in the way a storm cloud is. He was a man whose spirit had been deep-fried years ago, leaving behind something hard and bitter. He watched the till like a hawk and counted every slice of bread. "Waste not, want not," he'd grumble, though it felt more like he simply didn't want anyone to have anything he didn't. He saw kindness as a liability, a weakness that cost money. Elena learned to move around him, to make herself small, to do her job without drawing his ire. She poured her heart into the small things she could control. A warm smile for a lonely customer, an extra splash of milk in Mr. Henderson's coffee, a perfectly arranged plate. These were tiny rebellions of care in a place that felt starved of it. She imagined her trattoria would be the opposite of this place. It would be warm, generous, a haven. She'd use real butter, not margarine. She'd serve bread warm from the oven for free. It was a dangerous game, dreaming so vividly of a life she couldn't have. It made the reality of the diner, the smell of stale coffee and Stan's scowling face, that much harder to bear. But what else did she have? It was a Tuesday night in late October. A cold, biting rain was lashing against the diner's big plate glass windows, blurring the streetlights into watery streaks. The place was nearly empty, the silence broken only by the hum of the refrigerator and the drumming of the rain. Elena was wiping down the counter for the 10th time, watching the clock, praying for 10 o'clock to come faster. That's when the bell above the door chimed, a small, tinny sound against the storm's roar. A boy stood there, dripping on the linoleum. He couldn't have been more than 7 or 8 years old, with big, dark eyes that seemed to swallow the room. He was wearing a beautiful wool coat, the kind of coat you don't see in this neighborhood, but it was soaked through and his fine, dark hair was plastered to his forehead. He was alone. He just stood there, shivering, a small, silent ship lost in a vast ocean. Elena's first thought was for his parents. Where were they? She looked past him, out into the dark, rain-swept street, but saw no one. Stan grunted from behind the grill. "What do you want, kid? We ain't a bus station." The boy flinched, but said nothing. His eyes darted around the room, full of a fear so profound it felt like an electric current. Elena felt a sharp pang in her chest, a protective instinct that cut through her exhaustion. She put down her rag. "Hey there," she said, her voice soft. "You okay?" The boy just stared at her, his bottom lip trembling. He looked not just lost, but like he had seen something he shouldn't have. There was an oldness in his eyes, a shadow that didn't belong on a child's face. And in that moment, he wasn't just a customer or a problem. He was a little boy who needed help. And wasn't that the most important thing in the world? Stan came around the counter, wiping his greasy hands on his apron. "Look, kid, I'm gonna have to call the cops if you don't tell me where your folks are." His voice wasn't mean, just impatient, the way you'd talk about a stray dog that had wandered in. The boy shrank back, his eyes widening in terror at the word cops. Elena stepped between them. "Stan, give him a minute, he's scared." Stan just shrugged. "Whatever. Just keep him out of the way. I'm not running a daycare." He retreated to his office to count the day's meager earnings. Elena knelt down to the boy's level. "It's okay," she whispered. "No one's going to hurt you. Are you hungry?" The boy gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. His gaze was fixed on her, as if she were the only stable thing in a world that was spinning apart. Elena knew Stan would have a fit, but she didn't care. She led the boy to the warmest booth, the one away from the drafty door, and sat him down. She went behind the counter and did the only thing she knew how to do to make things better. She cooked. She boiled a small pot of water and threw in a handful of spaghetti. She ladled her own personal stash of sauce, the one she made at home from her nonna's recipe, into a pan to heat. It was rich with basil and oregano, a world away from the watery ketchup-like sauce the diner served. She added 2 meatballs she'd made for her own dinner. It was a simple plate of food, but she made it with a tenderness and care she hadn't felt all day. She was breaking the rules. She was giving away food. But looking at that small, shivering child, she knew it was the only rule that mattered. She placed the steaming plate in front of him. For the first time, a flicker of something other than fear appeared in his eyes. He picked up the fork with a small, trembling hand. He ate with a quiet intensity, as if it were the first meal he'd had in days. He didn't speak a single word. Elena just sat in the booth across from him, sipping a glass of water, giving him the space he seemed to need. She asked him his name, and he mumbled something that sounded like Leo. She didn't push for more. The warmth of the diner and the hot food seemed to be slowly melting the fear that had frozen him. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was a fragile peace. For a few minutes, the diner wasn't a prison of greasy spoons and unpaid bills. It was a sanctuary, a safe harbor from the storm outside and the storm inside the little boy. Elena felt her own anxieties recede. Her own hunger, her own exhaustion seemed trivial in the face of his silent terror. She had done so little, really, just a plate of pasta. But as she watched him carefully twirl the spaghetti onto his fork, she felt a sense of purpose that had been missing for a very long time. Just as Leo was finishing the last meatball, the headlights of a car cut through the rain, flooding the diner's front window with brilliant white light. It was a long, black sedan, sleek and expensive, the kind of car that looked like it had driven straight out of a movie. It slid to a silent stop right in front of the door. The sight of it sent a strange chill down Elena's spine. It didn't look like a police car. It looked like something else entirely. Who was this little boy? And who, in the middle of this storm, was coming for him? A man stepped out of the car. He didn't run through the rain. He moved with a calm, unhurried authority, as if the storm itself wouldn't dare to touch him. He wore a dark, impeccably tailored suit, and he opened the diner door without a sound. His eyes, sharp and intelligent, scanned the room in a single, sweeping glance before landing on Leo. Relief washed over his face, but it was a guarded relief, layered with something colder, harder. He walked toward their booth, his expensive leather shoes silent on the checkered floor. "Leo," he said, his voice low and steady. It wasn't a question or a command, just a statement. The boy looked up, and for the first time, his face relaxed completely. He scrambled out of the booth and ran to the man, burying his face in the man's coat. The man rested a hand on the boy's head, a gesture of profound tenderness that seemed at odds with his severe expression. He then looked at Elena. His eyes weren't unkind, but they were deeply unsettling, like he could see right through her, tallying up her debts and her dreams in a single glance. "Thank you," he said. The words were simple, but they carried an immense weight. He reached into his coat and pulled out a wallet, extracting several crisp $100 bills. He tried to hand them to her. Elena instinctively put her hands up. "No, please. It was nothing." He was hungry. The man's eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in what looked like surprise or maybe respect. "We do not accept charity," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "And we do not forget kindness." He placed $100 bill on the table. "For the food." He then tucked the rest back into his wallet. He guided Leo to the door, and just before they left, he turned back one last time. "You did a good thing here tonight." And then they were gone, swallowed by the night and the rain, the black car pulling away as silently as it had arrived. Elena was left alone in the quiet diner with an empty plate, a $100 bill, and the chilling, unshakable feeling that she had just brushed up against a world she knew nothing about. 15 years, a lifetime it felt like. 15 years of saving every spare dollar, of working double shifts until her vision blurred, of saying no to new shoes, to nights out with friends, to anything that wasn't essential for the dream. The memory of that rainy night, the lost boy and the mysterious man, had faded, becoming just another strange story from her years at the diner. The $100 bill had paid for a month's rent she thought she'd never make, a small miracle that she held on to. But now, after all that time, she had her own miracle. Elena's Trattoria. The name was painted in elegant script on the front window. It was a tiny place with only 10 tables, tucked away on a side street in a neighborhood that had seen better days, but was hanging on with grit and pride. Every detail was hers: the checkered tablecloth she'd sewn herself, the mismatched plates she'd found at thrift stores, the framed photos of her grandparents on the wall. The air didn't smell of grease, it smelled of simmering tomatoes, roasting garlic, and fresh baked bread. It was everything she had ever wanted, and it was killing her. The dream, now that it was real, was a relentless, terrifying weight. The loans were a constant knot in her stomach. The nights were long and the customers were few. She'd stand in her empty dining room, the hopeful glow of the candles mocking her, and feel a loneliness so profound it ached. She poured all her love and heritage into the food. Her lasagna was layered with handmade pasta, and a bechamel so light it was like a cloud. Her gnocchi were tender pillows that melted in your mouth. The food was perfect, but no one was coming to eat it. It felt like she had built her beautiful, perfect boat, and now she was just sitting in it, slowly sinking in the middle of a vast, indifferent ocean. Was this what she had sacrificed everything for? To fail in a quiet, empty room that smelled of basil and heartbreak? The trouble started subtly. A string of one-star online reviews, all posted within the same week, complaining about things that made no sense. The music was too loud, one said. Elena only played soft, instrumental Italian music. The waiter was rude, another complained. Elena was the only waiter. Then a delivery of expensive Parmesan cheese she'd been waiting for never arrived, the supplier claiming it was lost in transit. Small things, but they added up, like 1,000 tiny cuts. Then came Mr. Corbin. He was a developer, a man with a smile as slick and artificial as the renderings of the luxury condo building he wanted to put up on her block. He offered her a ridiculously low price for her building, talking about revitalization and progress. When Elena refused, politely but firmly, his smile vanished. "That's a mistake," he'd said, his voice dropping to a low, menacing tone. "This neighborhood is changing. You can either be part of the future, or you can be a memory." After that, the accidents started. A rock was thrown through her front window late one night. Graffiti appeared on her back door. Her gas was mysteriously turned off one Friday morning, right before the weekend rush she was desperately hoping for. It was a war of attrition designed to break her spirit, to make the daily struggle so unbearable that she would have no choice but to sell. Fear became her constant companion. Every creak of the old building at night made her jump. Every new customer who walked in was a potential threat. She felt utterly alone, a single small boat being battered by a storm she couldn't see. She reported it to the police, but they were dismissive. "It's a tough neighborhood," they said. "These things happen." But this didn't just happen. It was targeted. It was cruel. She was being erased, and no one seemed to care. It was another Tuesday, the slowest night of the week. Elena had served only 3 tables. The last couple had just left, leaving behind a half-eaten plate of pasta and a meager tip. It was barely 9 o'clock, but the weight of the day, of the month, of the year was crushing her. She was sitting at one of her empty tables, staring at a final notice from the bank that had arrived that morning. Foreclosure. The word felt like a physical blow. After all of this, after all the sacrifice, it was going to end. She was about to lock the door and surrender to the tears that were burning behind her eyes when the headlights swept across the front of the restaurant. Not one car, but 3. They were black sedans, long and silent, pulling up to the curb with an unnerving synchronicity. They parked, and the engines cut out, plunging the street back into a heavy silence. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. "This is it," she thought. "It's Corbin. He's sent someone to finish the job, to scare her out for good." The car doors opened, and several large men in dark suits got out. They moved with a purpose that terrified her. They didn't look like thugs, they looked like professionals. They took up positions on the sidewalk, their faces grim and unreadable, like statues guarding a tomb. Then the door of the lead car opened, and an older man emerged. He was tall and silver-haired, with a posture that defied his age. He wore a beautiful charcoal overcoat, and even from a distance, Elena could see the intensity in his eyes. He walked slowly, deliberately, toward the front door of her little restaurant, his footsteps the only sound on the silent street. Elena backed away from the door, her hand flying to her mouth. She was trapped. There was nowhere to run. She could only stand there, frozen, as the man reached the door, and the bell above it chimed, a sound that now felt like a death knell. The man stepped inside, bringing a chill of night air with him. He paused, just inside the door, his gaze sweeping across the small dining room. He took in the checkered tablecloths, the flickering candles, the photos on the wall. His expression was impossible to read, a mask of calm authority. The men outside remained perfectly still, their presence a palpable, threatening weight. Elena's mind raced. Should she scream, call the police? But what would she say? That a well-dressed old man had walked into her restaurant? He finally looked at her, and his eyes, a piercing shade of blue, seemed to hold the wisdom and weariness of 1,000 lifetimes. "Good evening," he said. His voice was gravelly but cultured, with a slight accent she couldn't place. It was not the voice of a common thug. "Are you still serving?" The question was so normal, so absurdly out of place, that it threw her completely off balance. I was just closing," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. The man gave a slight nod, as if accepting this information. He gestured to a small table in the corner. "If it is not too much trouble," he said, "I would like a plate of your spaghetti and meatballs. I am told it is the best in the city." It wasn't a request. It was a statement made with the quiet certainty of a man who was never told no. Elena was paralyzed by a mixture of terror and confusion. This couldn't be happening. She should be refusing, telling him to leave, but the words wouldn't form. There was an aura around him, an unspoken power that commanded obedience. So she did the only thing she could think to do. She nodded, her body moving on autopilot, and walked back towards her kitchen, her legs trembling so hard she was afraid she might fall. The old man sat down at the corner table, placing his hands flat on the surface, and waited. The silence in the room was absolute, heavy, and terrifying. In the kitchen, Elena's hands shook as she filled a pot with water. Her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs. Who was this man? Why was he here? Was this some kind of bizarre intimidation tactic from Corbin, making her cook for him before he delivered the final threat? Her mind was a whirlwind of fear. Yet, as she went through the familiar motions, dropping the pasta into the boiling water, heating the sauce she'd made that morning, rolling the meatballs, a strange calm began to settle over her. This was her space, her kitchen. This was the one thing in the world she was good at. Whatever was about to happen, she would face it after she made this plate of food. It was the only power she had left. She focused on the task, pouring 15 years of dreams and desperation into that one dish. She plated it carefully, wiping the rim of the bowl, garnishing it with a sprig of fresh basil from the little pot on her windowsill. Taking a deep breath, she carried the plate out into the dining room. The man hadn't moved. He watched her approach, his expression unchanged. She set the plate down in front of him. He looked at it for a long moment, then picked up his fork. He took a single bite, a forkful of spaghetti, and a small piece of meatball. He chewed slowly, thoughtfully. Then he closed his eyes, and a profound stillness came over him. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched the corners of his mouth. He opened his eyes and looked directly at her. "It tastes," he said, his voice soft with something that sounded like wonder. "Exactly as I remember." Elena stared at him, bewildered. "I'm sorry, sir," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Have we met before?" The man didn't answer. Instead, he gave a slight nod toward the door. One of the men from outside entered silently and stood by his side. Following the old man's gaze, he turned to a younger man who had just stepped out of the back of the lead car. "Bring him in," the old man commanded softly. A moment later, a handsome young man in his early 20s, dressed in a sharp suit, walked into the restaurant. He had a polite, serious face and kind, dark eyes that were somehow familiar. The old man gestured toward the young man. "My grandson may not remember your face," he said, his gaze fixed on Elena, "but for 15 years he has never forgotten the taste of your kindness. Elena, I would like you to meet Leo." The name hit her like a physical force. Leo, the world tilted on its axis. Suddenly she wasn't in her failing restaurant anymore. She was back in the dingy diner, the rain lashing against the windows, and a small, terrified boy was sitting in a booth, shivering. She looked at the young man, truly looked at him, past the expensive suit and the confident posture, and saw him. The same dark, soulful eyes, the same quiet intensity. It was him. A flood of forgotten details came rushing back, his soaked wool coat, the way he clutched his fork, the silent terror on his face. "My God," she whispered, her hand covering her mouth. "The little boy. You were—" The young man, Leo, gave her a small, respectful smile. "I was," he said. "I got separated from my uncle during a difficult family matter. I was lost and scared. I walked until I saw the lights of your diner. The older man, Leo's grandfather, picked up his fork again. That night, my family was in chaos, he explained, his voice even and low. My son, Leo's father, had just been in a terrible accident. We were at the hospital, distracted, grieving. In the confusion, my grandson, my only grandson, wandered away. For 2 hours, we thought we had lost everything. He paused, taking another bite of pasta. My nephew found him here. Safe, warm, and fed. You asked for nothing. You showed him compassion when you had every reason to turn him away. In my world, a debt like that is not a trifle. It is a bond, it is everything. Elena sank into the chair opposite him, her legs no longer able to support her. The man in the sharp suit who had picked Leo up that night, his unsettling eyes, the crisp $100 bill, it all clicked into place with a terrifying clarity. This wasn't a developer's threat, this was something else entirely. She had stumbled into a world she only knew from movies, a world of honor and codes she didn't understand. She had given a plate of spaghetti to the grandson of Don Moretti. Don Moretti. The name wasn't spoken, but she knew it as surely as she knew her own. His family was a legend in this city, a whispered myth of power and influence that operated in the shadows. They weren't just gangsters, they were an institution, an invisible government with their own laws and their own form of justice. And she, a struggling waitress who just wanted to run a small restaurant, had unknowingly sheltered their heir. We have been aware of you for a long time, Elena, the Don continued, his voice calm and paternal. We watched you leave the diner. We watched you save every dollar. We watched you build this beautiful place with your own 2 hands. We respected your struggle. A person of honor must be allowed to make their own way. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes holding hers. But honor also dictates that we do not stand by while one of our own is being crushed. He gestured around the empty room. Tell me about your troubles. Tell me about this man, Corbin. Hesitantly at first, and then in a rush of desperate relief, Elena told him everything. The threatening visits, the lowball offer, the 1-star reviews, the broken window, the constant, grinding fear. She told him about the foreclosure notice from the bank, the feeling that her dream was slipping through her fingers like sand. She didn't know why she was telling him, this powerful, dangerous man, but she felt, for the first time in months, that someone was truly listening. When she finished, her voice choked with emotion. The Don was silent for a long moment. He carefully wiped his mouth with his napkin, folded it, and placed it on the table. He looked at her, his expression unyielding as granite. This developer, he said, the words cold and precise, has made a grave miscalculation. He has mistaken this neighborhood's heart for weakness. This neighborhood is under the protection of my family, and you, Eleanor, are now the heart of this neighborhood. Your trouble is over. The next morning, Eleanor woke up expecting the familiar dread to settle in her stomach, but it didn't. Something had shifted. The air felt lighter. She went to the restaurant, half expecting to find another broken window or a new threat. Instead, she found a crew of painters already at work on the building's exterior, applying a fresh coat of warm terracotta paint. A man in a clean work uniform introduced himself as being from the Neighborhood Improvement Association and said a benefactor wished to remain anonymous. Inside, an electrician was fixing the faulty wiring in her kitchen that she could never afford to repair. He simply tipped his cap and said, "Don't worry about the bill, miss. It's been taken care of." Her phone rang. It was Mr. Corbin's assistant, his voice trembling. He was calling to formally withdraw their offer and to offer a sincere, profuse apology for any misunderstandings. Later that day, her phone buzzed again. It was her bank manager. An anonymous deposit had been made into her business account, enough to cover her loans for the next 3 years. The manager sounded baffled, but congratulated her on her newfound investor. Elena just stood in the middle of her suddenly bustling restaurant, a dizzying mix of disbelief and overwhelming gratitude washing over her. It was all happening so fast. like a dream. She looked at the fresh paint, listened to the hum of the new refrigerator that had been delivered an hour earlier, and finally allowed herself to believe it was real. Her trouble was over. Don Moretti had not made a promise. He had delivered a verdict. The silent, invisible machine of his influence was now working not against her, but for her. A debt had been called in, and the payment was her peace of mind. That night, for the first time in years, Elena didn't stand in an empty dining room. Every single table was full. They came in quiet, respectful waves, couples, families, groups of men in sharp suits. They didn't have reservations, they just appeared. They ordered generously, praised the food with sincere reverence, and paid their bills in cash, leaving tips that made Elena's eyes water. No one mentioned the Moretti family, no one mentioned the Don. But they all had the same look in their eyes, a quiet respect, an unspoken understanding. They were here on a mission. They were here to support one of their own. Her little trattoria, once a quiet monument to a failing dream, was now the most popular restaurant in the neighborhood, buzzing with warmth and life. One of the Don's men, a quiet, older man who introduced himself as Marco, stopped by at the end of the night. He was the family's consigliere, the Don's most trusted advisor. "The Don does not believe in handouts, Elena," he explained gently. "A handout can be an insult. It implies a person cannot stand on their own. This," he said, gesturing to the full, happy dining room, "is not a handout. This is a foundation. We have simply leveled the ground for you so that your house may stand strong." He looked at her with kind, knowing eyes. "You have a great gift. Your food is made with love. This community was starving for a place like this. We just had to make sure they could find it." He placed a small, unmarked envelope on the counter. "For any future troubles," inside was a simple business card with a single phone number on it. No name, no address, just a number. "A single plate of pasta fed our future," Marco said before he left. "It is only right that we ensure yours." Elena's trattoria became a neighborhood legend. It was more than just a place to eat. It was a sanctuary, a hub of the community. People called it the Fortunate Restaurant, whispering that it was blessed with a special kind of luck. Elena knew it wasn't luck, it was loyalty. It was a debt repaid with a quiet, unwavering river of support. She worked harder than ever, but now her work was filled with joy, not desperation. She hired a small staff, other young people from the neighborhood, with dreams of their own. She paid them well and treated them like family. The restaurant thrived, a beacon of warmth and hope on a street that was slowly coming back to life. The other small businesses on the block felt the change too. The harassment stopped. The streets felt safer. The invisible hand that had once been a threat was now a shield, protecting them all. Leo would come in sometimes, usually with his family, for Sunday dinner. He was studying to be a lawyer, and he had a kind, serious way about him. He and Elena never spoke of that rainy night 15 years ago. They didn't need to. The understanding was there, in a shared glance, a warm smile. It was a bond forged in a simple act of kindness, a connection that had silently grown and blossomed into this new, beautiful reality. She had her dream. It was more vibrant and more meaningful than she had ever imagined, because it wasn't just hers anymore. It belonged to the community that had embraced her. It was a testament to the fact that you never know which simple act, which small gesture of compassion will be the one that changes everything. One quiet afternoon, years later, Elena was sitting at one of her tables, watching her own daughter, a little girl with big, dark eyes, carefully twirling spaghetti onto a fork. The restaurant was peaceful, filled with the golden light of the late sun. She thought back to that rainy night, to the choice she made. She could have listened to her boss. She could have turned the boy away, told him it wasn't her problem. It would have been the easy thing to do. She was tired, hungry, and broke. She had every reason to be selfish, but she wasn't. In that moment, her own hardship had connected her to his, creating a spark of empathy that had lit a long, slow-burning fuse. She realized that the world is not saved by grand gestures, but by the small, countless acts of quiet compassion we perform when no one is watching. A plate of food, a kind word, a moment of shelter from a storm. You offer it without any expectation of reward, simply because it's the right thing to do. And sometimes, years later, in the most unexpected way imaginable, that kindness comes back to you, not as a simple repayment, but as a tidal wave of grace that lifts you up and carries you home. We all face moments where we can choose to help or to look away. What's a small act of kindness you've witnessed or been a part of that had a big impact? Share your story in the comments below. And if you believe in the power of human connection, subscribe for more stories that remind us of the good in the world.